I was halfway through my morning coffee when my phone buzzed. It was a group text from my mom. Just one line. "This year, just your sister's family." That was it. No love you, no explanation, no soft landing. Just a reminder, like always, that I don't count. For a second I thought maybe I misread it. I read it again, out loud this time, because sometimes your brain tries to protect you from reality. Nope, crystal clear. Thanksgiving at Mom and Dad's seat saved for Victoria and her family, and me conveniently erased like I was never born. If you grew up like me, you'd know this wasn't the first time. My sister Victoria has always been the favorite. She's the golden child, the one with the perfect hair and the endless praise. Me? I was the one doing chores, making sure dinner didn't burn, and getting told to stop complaining. It was like being the understudy in a play where the star never got sick. I stared at that text for way too long. My hand shook a little, but then I caught myself laughing. Not the funny kind of laugh, more like the laugh you let out when life reminds you where you stand. It's not new. It's not even surprising, but it still cuts. And here's the thing, I'm not some screw-up they can justify ignoring. I'm Captain Danielle Monroe. I've served for over a decade. I've led missions overseas that most people wouldn't even believe if they saw them in a movie. I've got medals stacked in a drawer because displaying them at home feels pointless when your family couldn't care less. I can tell you the exact moment this became normal. I was 14. Mom forgot to pick me up from practice because Victoria had a ballet recital. I waited outside the gym until the janitor locked up. By the time she showed up, she acted like it was my fault. That's how it's always been. So when I saw that text, my brain went on autopilot. The soldier side of me kicked in. You get bad intel, you adjust the plan, you don't cry about it, you don't beg for clarity, you move. I kept rereading it not because I needed the words, but because I needed that final confirmation. The kind of proof that tells you, all right, this is it. No going back. I put the phone down and leaned back in my chair. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the fridge. For a second I imagined walking into their Thanksgiving anyway, uninvited. Just showing up in uniform, pulling out a chair, and daring anyone to tell me to leave. But that would give them exactly what they want, me groveling for scraps. I've done that too many times already. When I was deployed, I got used to missing holidays. You tell yourself it's duty, it's sacrifice, and it is. But deep down, you also hope when you finally come home, someone will save you a seat. Not out of obligation, but because they want you there. That hope kept me sane some nights. But that hope gets smaller every year. I thought about calling Mom back, just to ask, why? Like maybe there'd be some decent reason, like limited seating or some awkward conflict I didn't know about. But the truth is, I already knew the reason. The reason is always the same. Victoria's comfort matters more than my existence. If including me makes her roll her eyes or sigh dramatically, then I'm cut. End of discussion. It's funny, because in the military, you learn that everyone has a place at the table. Doesn't matter if you're the general or the new recruit. If you're part of the unit, you eat. Period. Nobody checks if you're the favorite child before handing you a plate. In my world, loyalty counts. In theirs, favoritism does. I kept thinking about my grandfather, the only one who ever seemed to notice me. He used to say, "Danny, the world doesn't owe you fairness, but you damn sure can build your own." He was a World War II vet, and the kind of man who never sugarcoated anything. I didn't get it when I was younger, but staring at that text, it clicked. I'd been begging for fairness from people who didn't care if I starved. I picked the phone up again and stared at Mom's message. I could have responded with something sharp, something sarcastic, but what was the point? That's the trap. You lash out, they call you dramatic, and suddenly you're the problem. I wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. So I just put the phone face down on the table and sat there in silence. And here's the twist I didn't expect. Instead of feeling crushed, I felt a strange calm. It was like a switch flipped. The years of being sidelined, overlooked, forgotten, it all boiled down to this one lousy text. No big speeches, no fake apologies. Just confirmation that I'd never be in. And once you see it that clearly, you can't unsee it. I remember smirking at my own reflection in the microwave door. My eyes looked tired, sure, but there was something else in there too. Something I hadn't felt in a while. Control. They wanted me erased, but they just gave me the perfect excuse to stop playing their game. The coffee was cold by then, but I finished it anyway. The taste was bitter, and so was I. But bitterness can be fuel, if you know how to use it. I pushed the chair back and walked into the living room, letting the sound of my boots hit the hardwood floor. Every step made me think about how many years I'd been walking on eggshells in that family, trying not to upset the balance that was already stacked against me. When I was a kid, I used to think maybe I was just unlucky. Some people get the spotlight, some people get the shadows. My sister Victoria got the spotlight, always. She didn't even have to work for it. She'd smile and the room would tilt toward her like gravity. I'd get the leftovers' attention only when it was convenient. One memory sticks out sharper than the rest. I was 9. Dad promised to come to my science fair. I had worked for weeks on this project, building a model of the solar system out of styrofoam balls and wire. When the night came, I stood there, clutching my little presentation, waiting for him to show. He never did. Later I found out he was at Victoria's piano recital, front row, clapping like she'd discovered fire. Mom told me, "Your dad can't be everywhere at once." That was the excuse. But somehow he was always exactly where Victoria was. As I got older, I learned to stop expecting. You only set yourself up to bleed when you keep holding out your hand, and nobody takes it. By high school, I didn't even bother telling them about things I was proud of. I'd get my grades, my coach would congratulate me, and I'd quietly fold the certificate into a drawer. Meanwhile, the living room was covered in Victoria's trophies, ribbons, framed photos. It looked like a shrine. I enlisted at 18, partly because I wanted out, and partly because I thought maybe, just maybe, if I did something big enough, they'd notice. I came back from basic training leaner, tougher, with a buzz cut that made Mom frown and Dad ask why I looked too serious. Victoria rolled her eyes like I'd joined the circus. The first time I deployed overseas, I wrote letters home, long ones, describing the heat, the camaraderie, the insane situations that never make the news. I didn't expect them to understand, but I thought they'd at least care. Weeks passed with no response. Then one day, I got a care package from my grandfather. Just him. Inside was jerky, socks, a note that said, "Proud of you, kid. Hold the line." I kept that note in my vest pocket every mission. Still have it. Meanwhile, back home, my parents missed the ceremony when I was awarded a commendation. They said flights were too expensive, and Victoria had a big thing that week. You know what the big thing was? Her engagement party. They threw her a backyard celebration that same night. I saw the photos on Facebook, balloons, champagne, everyone smiling. And me? I was in a desert, holding a medal I'd earned while thinking, yeah, that tracks. It's not that I wanted a parade. I just wanted them to show up once. To say, "We see you. We're proud." Instead, I became background noise in my own family's story. The funny part? The military taught me more about family than my actual family ever did. You fight side by side, you sweat, you bleed, and nobody cares who the favorite is. Respect is earned, loyalty is currency, and everyone eats the same crappy rations together. That bond was real. Coming home to the Monroes felt like stepping back into a theater where the script never changes, and my role was already written, invisible. I remember one Christmas after I'd been gone for 2 years. I walked into the house, uniform pressed, boots polished, thinking maybe the sight of me in dress blues would stir something. Mom smiled, said I looked official, and then went back to fussing over Victoria's new fiancé. Dad shook my hand like I was a neighbor dropping by. Victoria barely glanced up before going back to telling a story about some spa retreat. I could have been a delivery driver and the reaction would have been the same. That was the moment I stopped hoping they'd change. I realized their blindness wasn't accidental, it was a choice. They chose her, over and over. And me? I was just tolerated. The practical one, the reliable one, the soldier who'd never make waves. Grandpa was the only person who gave me straight talk. He'd sit on the porch with his coffee and say, "Kid, stop waiting for them to clap. Clap for yourself. Build your own damn table if they won't give you a seat." I used to think that was just one of his crusty old sayings. Turns out, it was prophecy. So standing in my own living room with that text burning a hole in my mind, I could feel the years collapsing into this one truth. I'd been erased long before Mom ever typed those words. This wasn't a one-off insult. It was the final stamp on a lifetime of being overlooked. And yet, there was something freeing about it. When you stop waiting for scraps, you start thinking about the feast you can make on your own. I walked past the window and pulled the blinds open, letting in the sharp New Hampshire sunlight. Out beyond the trees was land most people in town didn't even know belonged to me. 30 acres of maples, oaks, and rolling hills, ending at a lake that sparkled like it was ripped straight out of a postcard. To anyone else, it was Maplewood Estate. To me, it was the one thing in my life nobody could take credit for except my grandfather. He left it to me when he passed. Not Victoria, not my parents, me. He never explained why, but I didn't need him to. He saw me. He knew what it meant to be overlooked by people who should have been your biggest supporters. He didn't leave me speeches or long letters, just the deed in my name and a note folded inside. It's yours. Use it well. That was it. The place had history. Built in the late 1802, big wraparound porch, fireplaces in almost every room, and a barn out back that could fit 3 trucks. My family called it the old money pit whenever it came up. Too much work, too isolated, not useful. But to me, it was freedom. When the world turned its back on me, Maplewood stood there like a fortress. Solid, quiet, mine. I thought about all the times Victoria used to sneer at it, saying it smelled like old wood and disappointment. She never understood why I spent summers up here helping Grandpa fix fences, clear brush, sand floors. She was too busy tanning by the pool back home. But those summers taught me more than any classroom ever did. I learned how to build, how to work, how to stand my ground. That morning, standing in my kitchen, I realized something simple. I didn't need to beg for a seat at their table when I had a damn estate with a dining room big enough to host 50 people. They wanted to erase me from Thanksgiving? Fine. I didn't need to wedge myself into their world. I could build a better one right here, on land that had my name carved into the deed. It wasn't about revenge in the Hollywood sense. No fireworks, no dramatic confrontations. It was about reclaiming something I should have never had to fight for in the first place, my right to belong. Grandpa's voice was in my head, clear as day. Build your own damn table. The dining room at Maplewood was massive, with tall windows that looked out over the lake. I walked through it that day, dragging my hand across the long oak table I'd inherited along with the house. No kids' table, no main table, just one surface big enough for everyone. That's what family should have been, all along one table. No hierarchy. And the best part? I didn't have to ask permission. That realization lit something in me I hadn't felt in years. In the military, everything requires clearance, rank, chain of command. At home, everything required approval from Victoria or my parents. Here, none of that mattered. Here, I made the rules. I opened the old leather notebook Grandpa used to keep by the fireplace. He wrote lists in it, repairs to make, ideas for planting, who owed him favors. I flipped to a blank page and wrote at the top in big block letters, Operation Maplewood, Thanksgiving. My handwriting wasn't neat, but it was sharp, decisive. Just seeing the words filled me with a calm I hadn't had since I read that text. I started listing names. Not people who shared my last name, but people who actually showed up for me. Aunt Margaret, technically my mom's sister, but always more like a friend than an aunt. She was the one who used to sneak me pie when Mom said I'd had enough. Blake, my old neighbor who worked as a firefighter, the guy who never hesitated to help clear snow off my driveway when I was deployed. Claire, an old college friend who never cared about family politics, just asked how I was doing and meant it. And Paul, one of my former teammates, a guy who understood loyalty in his bones. The list grew. For every person who had ignored me, I thought of someone who hadn't. For every empty chair at their table, I imagined a full one at mine. The estate was big enough. The kitchen had double ovens. The barn had extra tables and chairs stacked in the loft. I could make it work. I could make it more than work, I could make it unforgettable. Standing in that dining room, I felt a surge of something that almost made me laugh. All those years chasing their approval, shrinking myself to fit into their version of family, and the answer had been right here all along. My table, my rules, my people. The soldier in me started running logistics automatically. Food how much, what kind, seating how many, where, timing who to invite first, who to bring in later. It wasn't bitterness anymore. It was strategy. Like planning a mission, Only this time the battlefield was a holiday. And the goal wasn't survival. It was belonging. I could see it so clearly, laughter echoing through these halls, the smell of roasted turkey filling the air, glasses clinking, kids running on the porch. No hierarchy, no silent judgment, no fake smiles stretched thin for Victoria's benefit, just people who actually wanted to be there. I closed the notebook, my pen still wedged inside, and placed it on the table. The weight of it felt like the start of something real. They could keep their perfect little gathering in the suburbs. Maplewood was about to host something better. I pulled the notebook back toward me and flipped the pen in my fingers, the way I used to during briefing sessions overseas. Once the title was written, the rest of the plan began to fall into place almost on its own. My mind switched into mission mode. Clear, structured, no wasted motion. Thanksgiving wasn't just a meal anymore. It was an operation, and Maplewood was my forward base. First thing was the invite strategy. Not some cheap text blast like the one I got, but something deliberate. Real invitations. I dug into the bottom drawer of the desk where Grandpa had stashed a box of old stationery thick paper with a faint maple leaf embossed in the corner. Perfect. I laid them out across the table, set the pen down, and started writing by hand. Each name had weight. Margaret got the first one. I wrote, "Dinner at Maplewood, my table, my rules. Hope you'll be there." I kept it simple. No begging, no over-explaining. She'd understand. Blake's card came next. For him, I added, "Bring your appetite and don't trade shifts. I've got more chairs than I know what to do with." The man once pulled me out of a snowbank when my truck died at 2 a.m. The least I could do was make sure he had a plate of turkey at a table that wasn't half politics and half judgment. Claire's was easy. "It's been too long. Come eat, laugh, and tell the stories you're better at telling than I am." And Paul. Paul needed something more direct. He wasn't the sentimental type. I wrote, "Brother, I'm building a table that makes sense. You belong there." I didn't know if he'd come, but I knew he'd at least pause before tossing it. When I looked down at the row of finished cards, I felt that familiar hum of readiness in my chest. The same buzz I'd get before a mission, supplies checked, routes planned, contingencies mapped out. This was smaller, sure, but the discipline was the same. The second step was logistics. I walked through the kitchen with a notepad, listing everything I'd need. Turkey, obviously. More than one, actually. Side dishes in quantities that would scare my mother, who always portioned like she was feeding models. I wrote down potatoes by the pound, pies by the dozen, stuffing, cranberries, green beans, rolls. The numbers climbed, and it made me grin. This wasn't survival rations, this was abundance. Cooking wasn't foreign to me. I'd spent enough nights on base improvising meals with whatever was left in the supply closet. If I could make edible stew out of canned beans, powdered sauce, and a mystery meat label, I could handle roasting turkeys with 2 ovens. Still, I wrote down a backup plan. Local caterer on call. Military rule number 1, redundancy saves you. Then came equipment. Tables, chairs, linens. The barn loft had stacks of fold-out chairs Grandpa collected from estate sales, the kind people overlook because they're a little worn. Nothing a quick sand and coat of polish couldn't fix. I made a note to haul them down over the weekend. As I mapped it all out, I realized how different this felt from the years I'd sat at their table. Silent, eating whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. Now I was the one setting the conditions, defining the mission, and nobody could pull rank on me here. I paused to take in the house around me, the tall ceilings, the heavy beams, the way the place creaked like it was alive. I'd spent so many summers here, sanding floors and hauling lumber, sweating next to Grandpa while he muttered about earning your keep. At the time, it felt like punishment. Now I saw it for what it was, training. He'd been teaching me to stand on my own, to build. Every nail hammered, every fence post set, it was all preparing me for this moment. So I leaned into it. I sketched a seating chart, not to assign spots like my mother loved to do, but to make sure no one was shoved into corners or kiddie tables. Everyone equal. 1 table, 1 meal. 1 family that chose to be here. When the notebook page filled with scribbles and arrows, I sat back, stretched, and laughed quietly. The whole thing had started from a text meant to push me out. Now it was turning into something bigger than a holiday. It was a mission to rewrite what family meant to me. I sealed each handwritten invitation in envelopes and stacked them neatly. On the front, I wrote names with deliberate strokes, the way I used to stencil labels on gear bags. No mistakes, no hesitation. Then I grabbed my keys, stepped out onto the porch, and slid into my truck. The drive into town took 20 minutes, down winding roads lined with bare trees and stone walls. I stopped at the post office, slid the stack into the slot, and stood there for a second longer than necessary. Watching the envelopes disappear felt final in the best way, like pulling a trigger you've trained months for. Once they were gone, the operation had officially begun. Back at Maplewood, I returned to the dining room, notebook open again. I started writing under a new heading, contingencies, because no mission survives first contact without them. I listed potential problems. Too many guests, not enough food, weather going bad, oven breaking down, last-minute no-shows. Next to each one, I wrote at least one backup. Caterer, extra propane grill, space heaters for the porch, extra blankets in case the kids got cold. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. That's the difference between chaos and control. I looked at the page, then out at the lake through the window. The water was still, the sky heavy with late autumn clouds. My family had spent years deciding I was optional. Now I was building something where nobody would feel that way again. The thought steadied me. I picked up the notebook and underlined the title, Operation Maplewood, Thanksgiving. The letters stood out like a mission patch. The phone buzzed on the counter just as I was pouring coffee into a chipped mug. I wiped my hand on a towel and picked it up, half expecting another pointless spam call. Instead, it was Margaret's name flashing across the screen. I hadn't even given the invitations time to hit mailboxes yet, but somehow she always had a way of being ahead of things. Danny? Her voice carried that familiar sharpness, the kind of tone that could slice through excuses before you even made them. You sent something. I didn't bother denying it. Yeah, figured you'd be the first to open it. There was a pause, then the rustle of paper. Handwritten, on real stationery. You trying to make me cry before noon? I laughed into the mug. Did it work? Her chuckle came through, low and warm. Close. Nobody sends invitations anymore. That's how I know you mean business. Margaret was never one for pretending. She'd been the odd one out in the family long before me, always too loud, too opinionated, too unwilling to smooth her edges. When the others sat in judgment, she cracked jokes and passed me extra pie under the table. She knew what exile felt like. You're serious about this, she said after a moment, her voice losing the humor. Dead serious. Maplewood's big enough. And I'm not doing the half-smile, polite laugh routine at Victoria's anymore. Another pause. I could hear her tapping her fingernails on something, a nervous habit I'd noticed since I was a kid. Finally, she said, Then I'll be there. And I'll bring my pecan pie. The real one, not the store-bought crap your mother pretends to like. For a second, I didn't know what to say. A weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying slid right off my chest. One yes. That was all it took for the plan to feel real. Thanks, Margaret, I said, softer than I meant to. Don't thank me, she shot back. Thank yourself. You're the only one finally doing what the rest of us were too polite to. When the call ended, I stood in the kitchen a little longer, staring out the window at the lake. The soldier in me cataloged it like a mission checkpoint. Objective 1, secure first ally complete. Later that afternoon, her car pulled up the long gravel drive, crunching to a stop in front of the porch. She got out, wrapped in a red coat, sunglasses perched on her head, like she owned the place. I walked down to meet her, and without a word, she pulled me into a hug. Still smells like wood smoke and coffee in this house, she said, stepping inside. Good. Means it hasn't been ruined. Dadden. I showed her the notebook on the dining table. She flipped through the pages, reading my lists and scribbles, and nodded like she was inspecting blueprints. You're organized. This isn't just a dinner, it's a campaign. Guess I can't turn it off, I said with a shrug. Don't. It's exactly what this family needs, a little structure and a lot less ego. She dropped into one of the old oak chairs and looked at me. You know they're gonna hate this, right? I'm counting on it. I do. Her grin widened. That's my girl. We spent the next hour walking the property. Margaret pointing out things I'd stopped noticing, the way the barn doors leaned, how the porch railing needed tightening, where the trees could use trimming. She talked like she belonged here, like she'd been waiting for me to claim it so she could too. By the time she left, She'd promised to bring extra blankets, her good china, and a couple bottles of wine she'd been saving. "If we're doing this," she said, sliding into her car, "we're doing it right." Watching her drive off, I realized just how starved I'd been for someone to stand on my side without conditions. Not because of rank, not because of obligation, just because they chose to. That night, I sat at the oak table again, notebook open, and underlined her name twice on the list. Margaret was in. And suddenly, the operation didn't feel like me against the world anymore. It felt like the start of a family worth fighting for. Margaret's tire tracks were still fresh in the gravel when I slid back into the house and grabbed the stack of envelopes I hadn't mailed yet. Something in me didn't want to wait for the postal service to play middleman. Some missions worked better face to face. The first stop was Blake's fire station. The guy had been running into burning buildings since he was barely old enough to rent a car, and somehow he still made time to fix my busted furnace when the pilot light went out last winter. I pulled up to the brick building and spotted him out front, washing down one of the engines. "Danny Monroe," he said, grinning through the spray of the hose. "You back in town or just passing through?" "Back for good," I said, handing him the envelope. "Thought I'd deliver this one personally." "I know." He wiped his hands on a rag and tore it open right there, scanning the handwritten words. His eyebrows shot up. "Thanksgiving at Maplewood? You cooking, or do I need to bring the fire extinguisher?" "Both wouldn't hurt," I deadpanned. He laughed, a deep belly laugh that echoed against the station walls. "Hell yes, I'm in. I'll swap shifts if I have to." Beats choking down cafeteria turkey again. Another check mark in the mental logbook. Ally secured. From there, I headed across town to the university, where Claire was finishing up a lecture. She spotted me at the back of the classroom and practically bowled her students over, dismissing them early. "Danny!" She wrapped me in a hug so tight I thought my ribs might crack. "I thought you were overseas again. What's this?" I handed her the envelope. She opened it delicately, as though it were a fragile artifact instead of a dinner invite. When she read it, her eyes lit up. "Finally," she said, "a Monroe holiday that doesn't revolve around Victoria's voice carrying across the room. Count me in. I'll bring my famous sweet potato casserole, and by famous, I mean infamous for how fast it disappears." I grinned. That's exactly the kind of logistics I need. By the time I left campus, my notebook was mentally updated again. 2 more allies locked in. Paul was the wild card. He and I had been through things together that don't fit into neat conversations. Firefights, medevacs, the kind of nights where you only get through by leaning on the person next to you. He'd been back stateside for a while, working odd jobs, drifting a bit. I wasn't sure if he'd even pick up my call. I dialed anyway. He answered on the 3rd ring, voice rough like he'd just woken up. "Monroe, you alive?" "Barely," I said. "Listen, I need you at my table for Thanksgiving." There was a long pause on the line. Long enough I thought he'd hung up. Finally, he said, "That's some kind of code?" "No code. Real table, real food, real people who give a damn." Another pause. I could hear him exhale. "You know I don't do family holidays." "Neither do I said. "That's why I'm building a different kind." Silence stretched again, then he muttered, "You drive a hard bargain, Monroe. Fine, I'll come. But if there's pumpkin pie, I'm leaving." I smiled into the phone. Noted. Sweet potato only. Nut. When I hung up, I leaned against the truck door, the cool metal grounding me. The list was filling fast. These weren't just names anymore. They were people choosing me. Choosing this table, without strings or history weighing them down. There was one more name. Tom Rayner. I hadn't spoken to him in years, not since Kandahar. I hesitated, then dialed his number from memory. "Rayner," he answered, voice like gravel. "Monroe," I said, "I'm setting a new table. There's a seat for you." A long pause. "I'll think about it," he said, and hung up. Driving back to Maplewood, the sun dipped low, spilling orange across the lake. For the first time in years, the place didn't feel empty. It felt like it was waiting. I carried the notebook back onto the dining table and started marking the names with bold strokes. Margaret confirmed. Blake confirmed. Claire confirmed. Paul confirmed. 4 names turned into 4 anchors. It was no longer about proving anything to my parents or Victoria. It was about proving to myself that I could build something they couldn't touch. The house creaked as I moved through it, But the sound wasn't lonely anymore. It was like the walls were listening, ready to hold the voices that were coming. The phone rang again, just as I was scribbling new supply notes in the margin of the notebook. This time, the screen showed Amanda's name, my cousin. I almost let it go to voicemail, but instinct told me to answer. Her voice came through tight, rushed. Danny? I didn't know if I should call, but Lily's been asking about you. Lily, her daughter, 10 years old, sharp-eyed, the kind of kid who noticed things adults thought they were hiding. She was one of the only reasons I ever tolerated those family dinners in the first place. She'd crawl into my lap, whisper jokes, ask me questions nobody else bothered to. What's going on? I asked. Amanda sighed, and I could hear chatter in the background. Maybe her kitchen. She saw the group text Victoria sent. She doesn't understand why you're not invited. She cried herself to sleep last night. My jaw clenched. It was one thing to shove me aside, but dragging a kid into the silent politics? That was low, even for Victoria. Amanda lowered her voice. I know you're planning something. Margaret mentioned it when she stopped by. If there's room, there's always room, I said before she finished. Maplewood's not about cutting people out. That's when I heard Lily's voice in the background, muffled but insistent. Is that Aunt Danny? Let me talk to her. A shuffle, and then her small, determined voice came through. Aunt Danny, why don't they want you there? The question hit harder than any interrogation I'd faced in uniform. I swallowed and kept my tone steady. Because sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, Lily. But it's not about you, and it's not about me being worth less. She sniffled audibly. Can I come to your house instead? I don't want to sit at their boring table if you're not there. For a second, I just stared at the floorboards, throat tight. Then I said, You'll always have a seat at my table. I'll save you one right in the middle. Her voice brightened instantly. Can I help set the napkins? Mom says you fold them nice. I laughed, the sound breaking through the heaviness. You can be in charge of napkins, dessert patrol, and anything else you want. When the call ended, I sat back against the chair, staring at the ceiling. Out of all the confirmations I'd gotten so far, Lily's was the one that cracked me open. Adults made choices out of pride or stubbornness, but kids saw the truth. They knew when something wasn't right. Later that evening, Amanda pulled into the driveway with Lily in the passenger seat. Lily hopped out before the car even stopped rolling and ran up the porch steps. She carried a crumpled piece of paper she'd been coloring on. This is for you, she said, handing it over. It was a drawing of a long table with stick figures around it. In the center, she'd written, Aunt Danny's Thanksgiving. I crouched down to her level and smiled. Looks perfect. Inside, I showed her the big oak table. The one I'd been planning around for days. Her eyes went wide. It's huge. Nobody has to sit at the kids' table here. Exactly, I said. One table. All of us. She grinned, already imagining it, and ran her hands across the polished surface. Then she darted off to explore the kitchen, the living room, the porch, like she'd just been handed a castle. Amanda watched her from the doorway, her arms folded. She's been looking for something real, she said quietly. I think she found it here. That night, Lily insisted on helping with the setup. We pulled out napkins from the linen chest, and I showed her how to fold them into simple triangles. She frowned in concentration, her little hands working carefully. Like this? She asked, holding one up. Perfect, I said. Better than mine. She beamed, that unfiltered joy lighting up the room. And for the first time in a long while, Maplewood felt like a home filled with family, not by bloodline politics, but by choice. By the time Amanda drove her back that night, Lily made me promise she'd get to sit right next to me. Not at the end, she said firmly. Right in the middle. You've got it, I told her, tapping her nose. Right in the middle. When the taillights disappeared down the drive, I stepped back into the quiet house and looked at the table again. There were names on my list that carried history, loyalty, and shared battles. But Lily's name was different. She wasn't just another seat. She was the reminder of why this mattered at all. The morning after Lily's visit, I pushed open the barn doors and let the sunlight spill across the old floorboards. Dust rose in tiny clouds, the smell of hay and wood sharp in the cold air. I pulled on work gloves and started moving things around, not because I needed the space for anything specific, but because cleaning and order always calmed me before a mission. Maplewood wasn't just a house, it was terrain. I walked it like I'd walked perimeters overseas, scanning for weaknesses, noting what needed reinforcement. The porch steps creaked too loud. The dining chairs were sturdy but uneven. The long oak table, though strong, needed sanding and polish to shine like a command center instead of an afterthought. I started with the table. I dragged it closer to the wide windows so the light hit the grain, then spread out tools: sandpaper, polish, a rag. Each stroke was methodical, like cleaning a rifle before deployment. Smooth the surface, wipe away the dust, check for imperfections. This table wasn't going to be a stage for hierarchy or petty power plays. It was going to be neutral ground, a place where everyone had the same seat, the same voice. As the hours passed, I laid out the chairs one by one, lining them evenly, making sure no head of the table existed. There would be no throne for Victoria, no symbolic position for my parents to claim authority. It was a single row of equals. Margaret stopped by mid-morning with a box of blankets and jars of jam. She leaned against the doorframe, watching me work. "You're treating that table like it's a Humvee you're about to roll out," she said. I wiped sweat from my forehead. "Not far off. This is the battlefield." She smirked. "Then you better win, Arlie." By afternoon, Claire arrived carrying a stack of books and a box labeled candles. She insisted the atmosphere mattered as much as the food. Blake showed up later with a tool belt, tightening the railing on the porch and replacing a couple of warped boards without even being asked. The place started to look less like an inherited relic and more like a headquarters. Paul came at dusk. He didn't say much, he never did, but he picked up a hammer and helped Blake without being told. Every nail he drove into the wood sounded like a silent agreement. He was in. Meanwhile, Lily had been busy too. Amanda brought her back after school, and she ran straight into the dining room with a shoebox full of folded napkins she'd practiced at home. She spread them across the table proudly, each one a little crooked, but hers. "This is where I sit," she announced, pointing to the chair dead center. "And nobody's allowed to move me. Ender 24. Copy that," I said with mock seriousness, saluting her. She giggled and saluted back. As night fell, we lit the fireplace, and the glow reached across the polished table. For the first time, Maplewood didn't feel like a place I'd inherited out of obligation. It felt alive. Still, the soldier in me couldn't ignore logistics. I made a checklist in the notebook: number of chairs, food assignments, parking space, weather contingency. I even sketched a quick map of the driveway in case we needed to guide multiple cars in. Old habits die hard. Margaret noticed and shook her head, laughing. "Only you would turn Thanksgiving into a tactical op." "It's the only way I know how to get things right," I replied. When the others left that evening, I stood alone in the quiet again, the fire crackling low. The long table gleamed, the chairs lined perfectly. Lily's napkins were uneven, but I didn't fix them. They belonged exactly as they were. I walked to the window, looking out over the lake, the moon reflected across the surface. This house had been silent for too long, but soon it would carry voices, laughter, maybe even arguments, but on my terms, not theirs. The mission wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming space, about proving that I could set a table where no one was forced to the edge. When I finally sat down at the headless table, the wood warm from polish and firelight, I felt something I hadn't in years. Control that didn't come from rank, or medals, or orders, shouted across a field. It came from choice. And this time, the choice was mine. The fire had burned down to embers when the knock rattled the front door. It was late. Too late for neighbors or deliveries. I pulled on a jacket, boots heavy on the floorboards, and swung it open. Tom Rayner stood there. Same squared shoulders, same eyes that never let go of a perimeter, though the years had added more lines around them. "You said there was a seat," he said simply. "Figured I'd claim it. I was closer than you think." I stepped back and opened the door wider. "You came a long way for turkey. Not just turkey." His eyes swept the room behind me, pausing on the polished table, the stacked chairs, the notebook open with plans scrawled across the page. "Looks like you're building a whole new command post." I shrugged. "Something like that." He set his duffel by the door, boots leaving mud across the entryway. Typical Tom always carried too much gear, always looked like he was ready to move out at a second's notice. We ended up in the kitchen, both leaning against the counter like we had in too many dusty safe houses overseas. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, just loaded. Finally, he broke it. "You still think about Kandahar?" The question landed like a weight. That night. The ambush. The way chaos lit up the dark sky and nothing felt certain for hours. "Every day," I admitted. He nodded once, as if he already knew. "You pulled me out. Carried half my weight when I couldn't move my leg. I don't forget that." I met his eyes. "And I don't forget who stayed behind with me when command said to pull back." It wasn't the kind of exchange you planned. It was the kind you carried like a scar, unspoken until it surfaced. He looked toward the table again. "So this is the new battlefield?" "Not a battlefield," I corrected. "A ceasefire, at least for the people I choose." He rubbed the back of his neck, considering. "You think your family's going to just let this slide?" I gave a short laugh. "They don't have to. They're not invited." For the first time since I opened the door, his grin widened. "That's cold, Monroe. I like it." That. We moved into the living room, the glow of the fire catching the lines of his face. He picked up Lily's drawing from the mantel and studied it. "Kids got vision, puts you at the center like it's already decided." "She's smarter than the rest of them combined," I said. Tom set the paper back carefully, more carefully than I expected from him. Then he turned, serious again. "You know, this feels bigger than Thanksgiving." "It is," I said. "It's about building something that doesn't collapse every time someone decides I'm expendable." For a while, we just sat in the crackle of the fire. The weight of old memories hung between us, but not in a way that dragged. It was more like both of us recognizing the ground we'd walked across and the fact we were still standing on it. After a bit, he reached down and unzipped his duffel, pulling out a bottle of bourbon. The label was scratched, the cap dented. He set it on the table like an offering. "Brought this back from overseas. Been saving it for something that mattered." I raised an eyebrow. "And you think this qualifies?" He poured 2 glasses, slid one across to me. "Yeah, I do." The bourbon burned like memory, sharp but grounding. For a second, the years between then and now blurred, and it felt like sitting in a bunker again, trading stories to keep from thinking too hard about what came next. Except this time, there was no mission clock ticking. Just a table waiting to be filled. When Tom finally leaned back, his eyes caught the firelight. "You sure you're ready for this kind of fight? It's not rifles and radio calls. It's messier." "I've fought messier," I said evenly. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then I'm in." It wasn't dramatic, no big declaration, just 3 words, steady as stone. But they carried more weight than most oaths I'd heard in uniform. And with that, the roster shifted again. Tom Rayner, confirmed. The next morning, the house smelled like polish and wood smoke, but by noon, it shifted to cinnamon, butter, and roasted garlic. The kitchen counters disappeared under dishes, pans, foil-covered trays. Margaret was at the stove, barking instructions like a drill sergeant. Blake kept sneaking pieces of ham. Claire swatted his hand each time, and Lily buzzed between the rooms like she owned the place. Cars started pulling into the driveway one by one, the crunch of tires on gravel, doors slamming, voices carrying up the porch. The quiet lakefront estate wasn't quiet anymore. First came Margaret's neighbors with baskets of bread. Then Claire's old roommate with her partner. Blake showed up in uniform pants, still smelling faintly of smoke from the station, carrying 2 pies balanced like explosives. Paul rolled in late, as usual, with a 6-pack under one arm and a casserole dish that looked suspiciously store-bought. Nobody cared. And then Tom, leaning in the doorway with his bourbon bottle tucked under his arm, nodding at me like this was just another mission we were about to kick off. The dining room filled fast. The polished oak table stretched wall to wall, chairs packed in tight. Every seat was full, no empty space to remind anyone of who wasn't there. No head of the table, no thrones, just one long line of faces, lit by candles Claire insisted on. I slid into my chair between Lily and Tom. The kid beamed up at me, pushing one of her folded napkins into my lap. "See? Swan?" she said proudly. I looked down. It was crooked, one wing shorter than the other, but I set it carefully on my lap like it was made of glass. "Perfect," I told her. Plates started passing, hands reaching across the table, voices overlapping. It was loud, chaotic, but it wasn't sharp or cruel. Nobody was waiting for the next jab, the next insult disguised as small talk. People just ate. Blake clinked his fork against his glass. All right, listen up. We've got turkey, we've got pie, and we've got Monroe, who somehow managed to host a holiday without blowing anything up. Laughter rolled around the table. I smirked. Give it time. Margaret raised her glass. To Danny. For opening Maplewood. For making space. End of 4. The others followed. Glasses lifted. And I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not the stiffness of duty. Not the hollow silence of being ignored. Something steadier. Lily tugged my sleeve. It feels like we're a team, she whispered. I leaned close so only she could hear. That's exactly what we are. As dinner carried on, the conversations crisscrossed the table. Claire told stories from her classroom, making the younger guests laugh until they choked. Blake retold firehouse pranks, embellishing wildly. Paul didn't say much, but when he did, it was enough to quiet everyone, his words landing with the kind of weight that only comes from someone who's seen too much. Tom, for his part, stayed steady at my side, pouring drinks, trading smirks, but mostly watching. His eyes scanned the room the way they always did, tracking exits, gauging moods, but softer now, like maybe he'd finally found a room where the only battle was who got the last roll. I caught myself laughing more than I expected, louder than I remembered being able to. It startled me at first, like hearing a stranger's voice, but nobody looked at me strange. They just laughed with me. The table, once a symbol of division, turned into noise, warmth, the clatter of forks, and overlapping voices. Maplewood had been too quiet for too long, but that night it carried sound in every corner. When dessert came out, pies, cakes, Margaret's jam cracked open with fresh bread, Lily climbed onto her chair and cleared her throat like she had an announcement. I just want to say, she began, voice shaky but growing, that Aunt Danny's table is my favorite table, because nobody gets left out here. The room hushed for a moment, everyone looking at her, then at me. Heat rose in my face, not from embarrassment, but from something sharper, something that almost hurt with how real it was. I reached up, steadied her with a hand on her back. Then let's keep it that way. The clinking started again, glasses raised, laughter returning. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, cold and dark, but inside Maplewood, the long table held steady under the weight of food, voices, and something I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. The pie plates were still half full when Claire pulled out her phone to snap a group photo. Everyone leaned in, faces close, arms tangled around each other, the long table stretched behind us like proof. She hit the button, the flash popped, and just like that, the moment was captured. I didn't think much of it until Lily grabbed the phone, laughing as she tapped out something quick before handing it back. Sent it to Mom, she said, matter of fact. The words landed like a stone in my stomach. Around me, the chatter kept rolling, but I felt the buzz of my own phone in my pocket. One glance at the screen. Victoria. I hit decline. It buzzed again immediately. Decline. A third time, a fourth. Finally, I slid my finger across and answered, holding the phone to my ear. Her voice burst through sharp and furious. What the hell is this, Danny? What kind of stunt are you pulling? The table went quiet. Forks paused midair. I calmly pulled the phone away from my ear, looked at it for a second, then deliberately pressed the speaker button and placed it in the center of the table. Her voice, now filling the room, continued its tirade. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for me? I let the silence hang a beat, the sound of her anger bouncing around the room. Then I said evenly, this isn't about you. Don't you dare play the victim, she snapped. Mom and Dad are furious. You've split the family apart. Matey 4. Across the table, Tom's eyes met mine, steady, telling me to hold the line. I leaned closer to the phone. No, Victoria, I didn't split anything. You cut me out. I just built a place where I still belong. Her laugh was bitter, sharp. Belong? You're embarrassing yourself. This circus, you think it's family? Lily's voice broke in before I could answer. Small but clear. It's better than your table, Mom. Nobody here gets shoved to the side. The silence on the other end was ice cold. I could picture Victoria's face. Lips pressed thin, eyes flashing. Put her back in her seat, she hissed. Don't you dare drag her into your pity party. Margaret's hand smacked the table. That's enough. Her voice cut through the tension, rough and unshakable. This is no pity party. It's Thanksgiving, and Danny's the only one who remembered what that's supposed to mean. Victoria tried again, her words sharper, but I'd heard enough. I'm not going to argue with you over turkey, I said flatly. You don't like it, don't call. Mom and Dad won't forgive this, she threatened. I raised my eyes around the table, the people sitting there, the ones who had chosen to show up. Then I said it clear, for everyone to hear. I stopped asking for permission to exist. The words hung in the air, heavier than the smell of roasted meat and spice. Across the line, there was only breathing, tight and uneven, before the call dropped. I set the phone down in the middle of the table, screen dark, and exhaled. No one spoke right away. Then Blake let out a low whistle. Well, he said, leaning back. Guess that's settled. The tension broke like a snapped wire. Voices picked up again. Chairs scraped. Someone laughed too loudly just to push the air back into motion. Lily curled into my side, her small hand gripping my sleeve. You didn't let her win, she whispered, almost in awe. I looked down at her. Then, at the faces around me. Not everyone by blood, but everyone by choice. And for the first time in years, maybe ever, I didn't feel like the outsider at my own table. The laughter had just started to rise again when the crunch of tires on gravel cut through the sound. Heads turned toward the windows. 2 car doors slammed shut. I knew before I saw them. The front porch creaked under heavy steps, and then the knock rattled the frame hard, impatient, not the kind that waits for permission. Every muscle in my back went tight. I pushed my chair back, stood, and crossed the room, each step steady. When I pulled the door open, the cold night spilled in around 2 faces I knew too well. Mom in her wool coat, lips pinched. Dad beside her, jaw set, eyes already sweeping past me like I was blocking their view of something they owned. Danny, Mom said, voice clipped. We need to talk. Behind me, the sounds of the table carried a burst of laughter. The scrape of a chair, but the entryway stayed silent, heavy with their disapproval. I didn't move aside. You can talk here. Dad's frown deepened. Don't make a scene. Invite us in. I held their eyes, then stepped back just enough. Not because they demanded it, but because I chose to. They walked in like inspectors, eyes flicking over the hall, the framed photos, the coats hung by the door. Mom's gaze landed on the glow spilling out of the dining room, her face tightening. So this is what you've done, she said, flat but sharp. It's Thanksgiving, I answered. With strangers, Dad shot back. With family, I corrected. The room quieted when they entered. Every face turned, the warmth dimming under the chill they brought with them. Lily shrank against my side, but I rested a hand on her shoulder. Mom's eyes darted across the table. Margaret, you encouraged this? Margaret didn't flinch. I encouraged someone finally treating Danny with respect. Dad's stare swung to me. This is childish. Running off, hiding in this house, trying to prove a point. I cut him off. Maplewood is mine. Granddad left it to me. Not to Victoria. Not to you. Me. Mom's face blanched, the first crack in her armor. Dad's mouth pressed into a thinner line. You think a deed makes you part of this family? He asked. No, I said. My voice didn't shake. It means I don't need your permission anymore. The silence stretched, only the crackle of the fireplace filling it. Paul shifted in his chair. Blake tapped a restless beat against his glass, but nobody spoke. Mom finally broke it. You've embarrassed us tonight. I straightened. No, you embarrassed yourselves years ago, when you decided one child deserved everything, and the other deserved nothing. Tonight, I just stopped pretending that was normal. Her eyes flicked toward Lily, whose chin lifted stubbornly. Don't drag her into this mess, Mom snapped. She invited herself, I replied. The room didn't move. The air taut, but something in me had already loosened. The words that once stuck in my throat now rolled out steady, final. I didn't wait for their answer. I turned back to the table, the food, the people who chose to be there. The chair I'd left sat open, waiting. Behind me, I heard the shuffle of their coats, the scrape of shoes on the floorboards. No slammed doors, no shouted words. Just their presence lifting, fading, until the night swallowed them again. I slid back into my seat. Tom's eyes caught mine across the rim of his glass, calm, certain. Lily pressed closer against my arm, safe, steady. The candles still burned. The plates were still warm, and the table, for once, felt whole. The night felt lighter once the door shut behind them. Not because I was happy they left, but because the weight that always came with them finally lifted. For the first time in years, my chest didn't feel like it was caving in at Thanksgiving. Conversation trickled back, awkward at first, then stronger. Plates were passed again. Someone poured more wine. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about this night had been perfect. But it was real, and it belonged to us. Victoria didn't call back. Mom and Dad didn't return. The silence from their side was louder than any argument they could have made. But I realized something. It didn't matter. I didn't need their approval to validate the seat I'd built for myself. Lily was the first to break the tension with a grin. She climbed onto a chair, holding a folded piece of paper she'd been scribbling on through dessert. "I made something," she announced, waving it like a flag. She opened it carefully, smoothing out the wrinkles. It was a drawing of the table, long and crowded, each person a stick figure with little labels above their heads. In the middle, bigger than the rest, she'd written, "My Real Family Thanksgiving." The room went still for a beat. Then Claire clapped. Blake laughed. And Margaret's eyes glistened. Lily handed it to me with both hands, proud as ever. I looked at that drawing, messy crayon strokes, uneven lines, but more honest than anything I'd ever seen. My throat tightened, but I managed a smile. "Guess we've got proof," I said. Paul leaned over to see. "Frame that thing. Better than any photo." The energy shifted then. Jokes started flowing again, louder this time. We passed around pies, argued over football scores, laughed about old stories. Not everyone knew each other before tonight, but by the end, it didn't matter. At some point, someone suggested a game. Claire grabbed a bowl and scribbled words on scraps of paper. "Truth or thanks," she explained. "You either tell the truth about something, or say something you're thankful for. No passing." It started light. Blake admitted he once dropped an entire pie at the fire station and blamed the rookie. Claire said she was thankful she didn't have to spend another holiday with her ex. Margaret confessed she'd been sneaking extra gravy for years. When it came around to Lily, she thought for a second. "Truth," she said boldly. "I didn't want to go to Mom's house this year. I wanted to come here, because here, nobody makes me feel invisible." Her words hit harder than she probably understood. Everyone went quiet for just a moment. Then Tom raised his glass. "To not being invisible," he said. Glasses clinked all around the table. When it was my turn, I didn't hesitate. "Thanks," I said. "I'm thankful for everyone who sat down here tonight, because you didn't have to, but you did." The game rolled on, laughter filling the house, the kind of sound that sticks to the walls. And as it went, I realized something I hadn't dared to admit out loud. Maybe this wasn't just a one-time thing. Maybe this was the start of a new tradition. Later, after the dishes were stacked and the fire burned low, people started gathering their coats. There were hugs at the door, promises to call, plans to meet up again. Nobody rushed out. Nobody left out of obligation. They left because it was time, and they genuinely wanted to be there. By the time the house quieted, only Tom remained. He was helping with the last of the glasses, sleeves rolled up, steady as always. "You did good tonight," he said, rinsing a plate. I smirked. "You mean we survived without a police report?" He chuckled. "That too." Then he grew serious, his eyes finding mine. "But I mean it. You stood up. You didn't back down. That's not easy with them." I dried my hands on a towel, leaning against the counter. Felt easier than letting them keep walking over me. We stood there in the quiet kitchen, just the sound of the fire crackling in the other room. Snow had started falling outside, dusting the porch and the fields beyond. He glanced toward the window. "Looks like the kind of night where the world resets itself." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let myself breathe. Let myself actually feel the calm for once. For years, holidays had been a minefield. Tonight, it finally felt like home. Lily's drawing sat on the counter beside us, a little crooked, smudged with pie filling at the corner. I touched the edge lightly, then looked back at Tom. "Family isn't where you beg to exist," I said quietly. "It's where you're seen." He gave a small nod, like he understood more than I said. Then he grabbed his coat, tossed me a smile, and stepped out into the snow. I stood there a moment longer, the house warm behind me, the cold night stretching wide outside, And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was on the outside looking in. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Looking back, I used to think holidays were about tradition, about following the script my parents set. Now I know better. A holiday isn't about whose name is on the guest list or who gets the big chair at the table. It's about the people who show up because they want to, not because they're told to. I can't change the past, and I don't need to. What matters is that tonight proved I'm not defined by who shut me out, but by who chose to sit down beside me. And that's the family worth keeping.